This happened about 2 months ago from the time this is posted. It was around 9:15 on a Saturday. That night, I decided to go on a run since I had just started going on a diet and was trying to go on a more healthy path. The park this occurred in was very close to my neighborhood, and it interconnected with other neighborhoods that were nearby to mine as well. I don't recall quite why I decided to run through this particular dark park that night, but I know I won't be doing so in the future. The moment I entered the park, I noticed it was completely empty. Or so I thought at least. I had been running for about 6 to 8 minutes when I needed to catch my breath. In fact, I was so exhausted from running that I was hunched over and practically panting. The moment I put myself up though, I immediately noticed a shirtless man sitting on a park bench. The park lamp was illuminating him slightly. Not even 2 seconds went by when he looked up from his cell phone, almost like he had been watching me before I'd even noticed he was sitting there. Creeped out now, I turned around and began heading home. I didn't much feel like running anymore anyway. Maybe 10-ish seconds later though, I turn around again, and the man is now gone. I didn't really think that much of it until I started to hear this weird rustling sound. It sounded like the grass around me was moving. The section of the park I was in had this huge forest on one side of the path, and the other had a mass of cut grass, with houses visible in the distance. It sounded like it could have been an animal, and I dearly wished it was. It happened once, then stopped, then happened again. I was genuinely afraid at this point. For some ungodly reason though, I stopped dead in my tracks and just stood there. The rustling stopped again, almost like whatever was lurking in those dark woods was moving in unison with me. The thing that really traumatized me though out of everything that was occurring was that while I was standing there, the dead silence was broken with what sounded like heavy breathing coming out of the woods. At that point, I didn't hesitate anymore. I ran and sprinted for my house. When I got to the entrance of the park, I could now hear a distant groaning coming from behind me. As I looked back to see what it was, someone emerged out of the tall grass in the woods onto the concrete pathway. It was the same man I'd seen earlier. I normally take a walk every Friday to attend my weekly Pilates class. It's a 15-minute power walk from my apartment in a relatively safe city in Eastern Europe. I've never felt unsafe in this area, and I wouldn't normally exercise much caution when walking alone at night. Tonight, however, after the end of class, I began my usual walk back home. After about 5 minutes in and a lot of corner cutting and alleyway shortcuts, I noticed a strange-looking man was now following me. The first glimpse I got of him at that point was a young man in his 20s, a hat on, elegant shiny shoes, and a black coat. On a closer look, he also had a link chain, the kind of chain you use in heavy transportation and to pull heavy loads, wrapped around his neck. I instantly got shivers down my spine and changed my pace of walking to very slowly, then very fast, to see if he tried to match pace with me. As you might imagine, he changed his as well, and I could see from the corner of my eye he was steadily following behind me. He was also on his phone, and I got the distinct feeling he was taking pictures of me. At this point, I was completely freaked out. But my first thought was that I was athletic enough to put up with this creep and that I needed to stay focused. I was on the main boulevard parallel to my apartment and decided to turn right in a very fast and sudden way. The man kept on walking right past it. I thought maybe I was being a little bit crazy. Perhaps I just imagined he was following me and it was all in my head. Only to find that 2 minutes later, he was somehow right behind me again. I must mention there were people on the street at every corner, so even if he wanted to attempt something in that moment, it would have been pretty much impossible. When I reached my apartment, I entered my house very quickly. I checked to make sure he wasn't behind me, and that was it. However, the scary part comes afterward. An hour or so after, my husband checked our building's security camera and saw that as I rushed into the flat, this creep had quickly hidden behind a car so I wouldn't see him and stayed there for a good many minutes watching the building. Afterwards, he approached the entrance and took a picture of it with the address engraved on it. I'm now scared he'll start stalking me or my family. Any advice or tips would be well appreciated. One evening when I was 16, I had taken my dog Tex to a park near my house. Tex was technically my dad's dog. My dad worked as a cop in our city, and Tex, a German shepherd, worked with him as a police dog. We had been there at the park for about 2 hours, and it had started to get pretty dark out. I got Tex back on his leash, and we started to head back for our house. It was a few blocks away, and by the time we left the park, it had gotten pretty dark out. It was a Sunday night as well, so it was pretty quiet all around. That was until I started to hear a noise behind me. I looked over my shoulder, and across the street, heading in the opposite direction, was a man dressed in an old Hawaiian shirt with old cargo pants and sneakers. He looked like he might have been about 50 or 60 and looked totally bored as well. The strangest part of the whole scene, though, was that he was dragging a rake behind him. This was the noise I was hearing. It was an old metal rake and was just scraping on the pavement behind him. The other weird thing was how Tex reacted to him. Tex is always serious when he's out on patrol with my dad, but normally he's a complete marshmallow when he's at home. When he noticed this guy, though, his hackles went right up, his ears went down, and he started to growl viciously. The man stopped under a streetlight and turned to look over at us. He just stared at us for a few minutes, so I tugged on Tex's leash and we kept on walking. After a few minutes, I turned around and looked over my shoulder again, only to find the guy was still staring at us. Now, all of a sudden, he dropped his rake on the ground and started sprinting right at us. And Tex started barking as loud as he could and trying to get at the guy, while I tried to pull him in the other direction. The man stopped when he saw Tex acting like this and just stood there in the middle of the road. I was dragging Tex away while the guy continued to just stare. After a few moments, he went back to grab his rake. This time, he started to calmly follow behind us. He was walking totally normal, not like he was in a hurry or anything. He was still clearly following us though, dragging his rake behind him all the while. After we finally made it to my house, I told my dad what was happening outside. When I gave him the description of the guy, he calmly told me to wait in the room and went to make a phone call. My room looks out over the street, and I looked out of my window, only to see the guy now standing in the middle of our driveway. I could hear Tex barking downstairs in the hall, and in the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. As I looked down, I noticed the guy had what looked like paint on his shirt front. I guess I hadn't noticed that while I was trying to get away. He looked up and noticed me in the window. He stood there looking at me, and it occurred to me that he was not showing any emotion at all. The entire time he'd been walking, running at me, or following me, he'd always had this emotionless, almost bored facial expression. He stood there just staring at me as the police sirens got closer and closer. 3 cars finally pulled up to our house. 3 of the officers grabbed the man, and he went with them calmly into one of those cars. I came downstairs and explained the situation to the police and my parents. It turned out the guy was not from our neighborhood. He had been diagnosed with severe mental issues before and had forgotten to take any of his medications for a while. The police think he got into a bus with no real destination in mind, and when he got off, just grabbed a rake from someone's yard while he was walking. The paint I had seen was actually blood from someone he'd met just an hour before me. He'd beaten that person up with his rake before continuing on his way. My dad told me I was lucky I had Tex with me. It clearly deterred the guy from getting too close. I don't go out much after dark now, and when I do, I always make sure I'm either with other people or have Tex nearby. A few years ago, I was doing an escape and evade, which went through the night. There were 4 of us in the team, out in the middle of nowhere in the UK. We were in between 2 forests, about 1 kilometer apart from each other, and I decided the quickest route would be to go through the forest ahead to get to where we wanted to go. It was pitch black out, and with no lights on us, we focused on a particular part of the forest to head towards to make our entrance in. As we got to the edge of this forested area, we discovered a collection of what appeared to be human skulls lined up along the path. That instantly freaked us out as we looked down the well-worn path leading off into the woods. So yeah, what did we do? We proceeded to follow that path and see where it went. I do recall thinking at the time, this is what people in horror films might do before they get butchered to death or something. After a bit of walking along this path, we came to a cleared-out section. We then saw a collection of makeshift huts made out of random bits of junk. As we proceeded further in, my mind was racing. There were obviously people who lived in these, and if they woke up, we would be surrounded. I signaled for everyone to retreat back the way we came. I must point out it was around 2 in the morning, and we were in stealth mode. Not a single word was being said. We exited back the way we entered and gave ourselves a good 200 meters or so of distance from that forest. We took a knee together to whisper about what we'd just seen. As we were all collectively freaking out, we then began to hear something from the forest behind us. Remember, we were in between 2 forested areas. We could hear drumming and what sounded like quite a few people not exactly singing but kind of humming and chanting. I had a vision in my head of hundreds of people running out of the forest towards us wanting to add our skulls to their path collection. For some bizarre reason though, during this event I told everyone it would be just fine since we were all wearing camouflage and face paint already. If we just lied down, then anyone who emerged from the tree line wouldn't be able to see us. After a couple of minutes of hiding and scanning both tree lines to check if anyone was emerging, we quickly headed back towards the forest with the huts, but went off right of the entrance and made a quick exit, all the time checking everything around us. One of the most bizarre and crazy things to stumble across in the middle of nowhere. I myself kind of put it down to devil worshippers, which I had encountered before, but I suppose that's a story for another time. I was on a scouting trip for my school's outdoor education program. We got to a campsite and ate. It was mid to late August, and the sky was very clear. It was also warm out as well, so we decided we would just sleep in the open that night. It got dark and we unrolled our sleeping mats and sleeping bags around an old fire pit that had been filled in with rocks. We soon fell asleep. I woke up maybe an hour or so later though, to hear the little pitter-patters of animals moving around. I didn't really think anything of it. I'm used to the sound of the woods when camping. As I was laying there though, I started to feel little feet climbing over my arm or my hand or the side of my neck. I sleep on my side, with my head resting on the bicep of my outstretched arm. I started to get up and grab my flashlight from my boots next to me. I turned it on, only to see a horde of mice skittering off me and returning back to the old fire pit which they had evidently made their home. After I saw it was mice, I relaxed a bit. I grabbed all my stuff and moved a bit farther away. Before I'd seen it was a horde of mice, I was very worried about a raccoon or something getting into our stuff. Luckily, we had it locked up enough that the mice weren't going to destroy our food or do anything too bad to our equipment. We did end up using that campsite for our trip, but we moved much farther away from the fire pit. Best to leave nature alone if you really want to have the best experience of it. I saw something strange in 6th grade camp. I snuck out one night because I was a little shit back then. I decided to go freak out the girls by jumping on the low roof. I wasn't thinking about spying on them, mind you. I just wanted to play a little prank on them. I saw a teacher out doing a patrol though, so I decided to revert course and head to the far side of the lake in the woods. Now, this was May in Michigan, so the leaves were just starting to come out. I climbed a hill, and just as I made it over the top, I saw a shadow moving to my right, farther and deeper into the woods. It was pitch black out, and I could hear a storm coming in the distance over anything else. I couldn't hear the sounds this thing was making. I thought it might have been a fellow camper perhaps, so I called out to whatever this was. I've grown up in the woods, so I have little fear of anything out there. There was no response though. I thought that maybe it might have been a part of a tree moving or something. Then I saw whatever it was move quicker than anything I'd ever seen, moving away into the woods. You know that saying, curiosity kills the cat? Well, that was no different for the unruly child I was. I decided to give chase to this mysterious thing. I followed this mass up and over another hill, and suddenly I was met by a huge gust front from this storm. Then came the sudden pouring of rain. I was distracted by this for a moment, but when I regained focus, the shadow was now gone. I had to find it again, so I went wandering in the rain. I stumbled around for who knows how long until I was struck by a sickening feeling. I had no idea where the fuck I was or where the camp was either. I just about shit myself then and there, but that feeling could not compare to the complete bowel evacuation I was about to have. I decided, you know what, screw that shadow. I needed to get back in bed before wakey time. I took a direction and just went with it, but as I walked on, I could now hear footsteps over the rain and wind coming from behind me. That meant one of three things. This thing was close, this thing was huge, or both. It turned out it was the latter. I turned around, and for whatever reason, lightning struck close enough to light up the woods. There, about 10 yards behind me, was this big 8-foot creature, mid-stride toward me. As the lightning subsided, I froze. Then I yelled out, "What the?" Before I could get the rest of it out though, whatever this thing was gave a loud roar. It was so loud and close I could almost feel its breath upon my face. It took off the way it came from, and I was left there in my newly baggy shorts. I was speechless. I erupted onto the shore of the lake. I slipped back quietly into camp unnoticed and went into the bathroom and broke down. I later tried telling my friends about this, but they all just thought I was joking around. My only real, almost freaky experience is when I was tent camping with my SO in a relatively developed, crowded campground high in the Sierra Nevadas. I was woken up in the middle of the night when campers across the road from us started making a ton of noise. We wondered what the hell was up with them when the noise eventually settled down. I decided I might as well get up and take a piss. I briefly debated just going around the back side of my tent, but I thought that people might hear or see me, so I walked the 40 yards or so to the campground bathroom. I finished my business and returned to the tent with no issues. I crashed hard and got up in the morning to see my SO talking with the campers across the way. They told her that a bear had wandered in during the night and had been going through all their stuff. They said the bear had taken their food, then went over to the area of our tent. I decided to look around, and sure enough, all the food wrappers from the food it had taken with it were right behind the tent where I was going to take a piss. Thankfully, I decided to choose another area and did not walk up upon and startle a bear in the dark in that night. I can't imagine that would have ended well for me.